The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this feature focus session. Today we're going to be looking at the Universal Function File Exporter, or UFE for shorthand. And Universal Function File Exporter is a tool that allows you to export files from B1UP to a format of your definition. In this session I'll be going through the UFE tool and I'll be showing you how to make some files based on data from SAP. The value, if you're new to the file exporter, is that I will show you how to do some file generation without the need of any developers. The reason that we built UFE is that many companies today need some kind of EDI or integration, and this could be, for example, between SAP database and SAP database, or it could be an external integration with a web shop where you want to have the sales orders or the items or the stock. So you need to export some kind of file from your SAP system and then import it into either another SAP system or a different system. The flow of UFE is that you export a document, one or multiple, from a database, and then you can choose to import them into a different SAP database using UFI. That's our file importer. I'm not going to show you that today, but UFE and UFI are working together in importing and exporting files. You could also choose to simply export the file and then have a different system pick up the file and handle it afterwards. UFE is made to not require any developers, so all the data that you need you get from the database using SQL, and then you need to define a template that describes the format, and then you use some keywords to actually insert the data that you got from SQL into the template. It works with different formats like XML, CSV, but also other formats that you might want to export to. UFE is a tool that's good when you have a small to medium sized format that are well defined that you want to export to. When you get up into large formats and standard formats that covers like 100 pages of manual, then it's not really UFE, then you might want to do it custom. But if you have these small to medium sized formats that are easy to understand and are well defined where the data in SAP matches more or less, then UFE is a good pick. UFE is not a developer tool, it's actually a consultant tool, and it only requires SQL and learning the format or the business logic of the format that you're going to export to. So basically everyone can do it if you have some SQL knowledge and if you're interested in actually learning the format and finding out what fields needs to go where. The basic flow of UFE is that you use SQL to get some data from the database. Then you define a template where you insert the data into, and then UFE will export a file onto your disk where you have chosen to save it. You can create different formats and you can run an UFE off a function button, a B1 validation or a menu item, but you can also schedule it and do something called batch. So you're able to actually fully automate the entire process using a schedule so that the user never actually have to do anything inside SAP. I'll now go into SAP and then I'll show you the first UFE, a simple one, and I'll go through the configuration window and show you what each field does and talk a bit about how it actually works. So the UFE I have created right now can be run off a business partner using a function button. And And if I open up the configuration window, it's just a normal universal function. So when you want to define a new one, you need to have a universal function, and then you need to select file exporter as the type. This here is the configuration window, and this is basically where you set up the template, you set up the SQL, and so on. So the first thing you want to do is you want to define a template, and this template is normally predefined by another company, or you have decided together with a consultant or from a different company or within your own, how should the format that's going to be exported actually look. So the template, you can actually write anything you want, and then you use keywords like this here to actually insert data into the template from the database. So all this here is just XML, and it's just predefined things that needs to be in your template. And then you have the dynamic part where you need to insert something into the tags in the XML. And for doing this, you actually use this syntax here. You get the data to insert by using a SQL. So over here we have a few buttons to open up the SQL sources that we're going to use for this UFA here. So if we try to open the body SQL source, we'll see that I have a SQL right now here that selects the card code and card name from the business partner table. And then I have this where condition here where I say where card code is equal to something called doc key. The doc key here is the primary key of the object that you're working on. So in this case here, the doc key will be replaced when the UFA is run with the business partner code. If you did this on a sales order, it would be the doc entry instead that would be inserted into the doc key. So the doc key keyword is a way to identify what you're working on now and for you to actually select out the correct data in your SQL. We then have this keyword here, and it basically tells UFA that I want to run a new SQL and that it should still take the SQL here and include it into the UFA as well. So this here is simply just to split up the source data into multiple SQLs, as otherwise I would have to do some kind of subselect, or I might need to have to do a join or something to actually get the data. But instead I can just write this keyword here, and then this here will be executed as a separate SQL. Now the way the keywords work is that the name of the column or the field in your SQL result is what you need to write inside the syntax here. So if I put them side by side here, I have this ampersand get company name, and this matches to this column here in my SQL result. And the same for the company phone, this one matches to this one here. So all the results of the body SQL you can get using this syntax here. And the key, so the card code column name is unique, so you can only have one column in your result called card code. And if you have multiple columns in the same result that's named the same, you'll get an error. So you need to have unique column names in the result set of your SQL, but then you can insert them into the template using this syntax here. So this is for the header data, but you might also want to actually have some line data. So the header data can only return one row, so you can only have one row in your result, while with the line data you can actually have multiple rows, and then you can use the syntax here called for each to actually go through each of the rows and insert the result of the row into your XML. So the rows are defined as a line source, where you can have one to many line sources. And the line source, first you need to define a key. So in this case here, I have document lines as my key, and this is what I use inside my template here. So I tell the system that for each line in the document lines, I want to run this part of the template. In my line source, I define what columns I want to pull out from the database, and I again use the card code as the identifier. And then I just pull out doc entry and doc total from all invoices for this business partner in the database. And then I go through each one of them here and inserts them into the XML. So if I actually go ahead and run this, I'll get an XML that looks like this, where you can see I got the company name, the company phone, then I got the card code, the card name, and then I got a list of all the invoices that I currently have in my database for this customer. So the for each syntax actually allows you to loop through a result and put out all the lines into the XML. You need to define where you want to have it outputted into. So right now, if I go into this path here, I will see that I have one document in the path, and right now it's called invoice underscore and then the card code that I ran it for. So you can use the doc key in the file path to actually make each file name unique. But when you run it, it will just export the document into the path you have defined here. You also need to set up a log folder so that if something goes wrong, you have a log where you can go in and see what went wrong. The next thing you need to define is you need to define what format is it that you're working with. We have XML file and we have custom. And the only difference between them is that if you choose XML file, it will actually escape the keywords or the result of the keywords before actually inserting them into the XML. So let's say that your card code had a special character in it that's actually used in XML. For example, this sign here. Then you would normally break the XML if you don't escape it. But if you choose XML file here, then we will escape it for you so that you don't break the XML even if your result contains special characters that are used in XML. If you choose the format custom, then we won't escape it, and then you just get the raw values from the database and you insert them into the template. You can define what encoding the file should be saved in. So many systems requires a specific encoding that they want to get a file in, and here you can define what encoding you actually want to export the file as. Then we have something here called default formatting, and the default formatting actually defines how should UFE format the values that it pulls out of the database when inserting them into the template. So here you can define the decimal separator, the group separator, and the decimal digits when you're working with doubles or decimals. And you can also define what date format you want to use when working with dates. So this way you don't have to manipulate the data beforehand in SQL, but UFE is actually able to specify some default formatting that will then be used when actually exporting the data. The last button over here is mark as handled SQL, and mark as handled is used to actually tell the database that you have now exported a file. So here you can write a SQL that would go in and update a UDF on, for example, the invoice and notify the system that this has now been exported, and then you could exclude that when in your SQL so that you only export a file once. So it's just for running an update statement when you're actually done with the export and you want to tell the system that this document has now been exported. So as I just showed you, the fields here from the result in your SQL can actually be used as keywords in your template. And you can only, in the header data, you can only have one row set returned, so you can only have one result. But then you can insert that result into your template. For the lines, your SQL can return multiple rows, and then you can go through each of the lines and insert them into the template. The default formatting is used to define how should, for example, the decimals or doubles be, how should they be formatted when inserted into the template, and you can also define how should it format the dates. And last, the mark as handled is just for telling the system update this UDF because I have now exported the document, and then you could disregard the specific document in your SQL so that you won't export it multiple times. Here I have a list of the different keywords that you can actually use in UFE. So as you saw, you could use the get syntax, but you also have the option to use the get syntax with a decimal like 20 or an integer like 20, and this will actually tell UFE that it should substring what it inserts. So in many formats you have a fixed length, so you can only have 100 characters in this field. So you can tell UFE that it should just chop off the string if it reaches 100 characters. You can use the same syntax on line level, so you can again say I want to chop off the string if it goes beyond some kind of integer. We have a few special keywords. So we have get raw. This is if you use the XML as format, then get raw will actually allow you to get the raw value instead of one that has been escaped. And similar, we have the get XML encoded that will give you the XML encoded string if you use the format custom. The doc key is going to be used in your SQL to actually identify and pull out the correct data, and it just gives you the primary key of the object that you're working on. I'll now show you a CSV format and how you could export something into that. It's the same concept as with the XML format. So on my business partner I have a button called Export Invoice CSV, and if I open it here, you'll see that again I have a template, but now it's custom instead of XML, and I have just hard-coded the column names in my CSV format, so card code, card name, doc entry, and doc total. And then again I go through each of the lines in my SQL result, and then I just write out card code, card name, doc entry, and doc total. So here I don't have anything in my body SQL source, but in my line sources I again have my document lines, and then I have my data that consists of the different columns that I want to pull out from the database. So if I try to run this here, it will just export a CSV file that I can then open in Excel. So it's really easy to output different formats. So XML is relatively easy, CSV is relatively easy, and you can also output other kind of file formats that you might be required to actually hand over from SAP. Now, this here was just some basic samples, but you might want to see a more advanced sample. So here I have a requirement from a customer. So I need to export open invoices per customer, and the export should have some customer data. It should have the invoice lines. It should be an XML, and the invoice should only be exported once. The customer also have a few requirements. The entire thing should be automated, and the exported invoice should be uploaded to FTP after it has been generated. So I have some format requirements that I need to fulfill, but I also have some customer requirements like should be automated and should be uploaded to an FTP after generation that I need to fulfill. So I will create this here now and show you how it's done. So first off, the definition was that I should export open invoices per customer, and that it should contain some customer data, and it should contain some invoice lines. So here on my AR invoice, I've created a button called Export Open Invoices. When starting out with creating a UFE, I always start out by running it off a function button. This way I can test it, and afterwards I go into actually creating the things that will run it on a schedule and that will upload it to an FTP. So here I have defined my template. Let me just open it up here. So my template consists again of a customer tag where I write out the card code and the card name, and then I have the invoice tag here where I write out the doc entry, and then I write out each of the lines that's on the current invoice. So I go through each of the lines on the invoice and write them out into the format, and I also include the card code and the card name. The SQL is really simple. I have a doc entry, a card code, and a card name, and I select them out from the invoice table, and I do this where the doc entry is equal to my doc key. In my line sources, I again have a key called document lines, where I just select out all the lines on the current invoice. The template plus the SQL gives me, if I press the button here, gives me the XML format that looks like this. So card code, card name, doc entry, and then the line data. And let me see if I have one with a few more lines. I have one here. Here I get the additional lines that I have on this invoice. So the first thing when creating the UFE is that you need to understand the format. Then you need to figure out what data should go into what field. You write the SQL like I did here, and then you actually have a UFE now that can export the document as the customer required. Now I need to automate this, so instead of having to click this button for each of the invoices, I need to be able to run this automatically. And to do this, we have something called a schedule and something called a batch. So first you need to define the batch, and the batch you can find under the B1 usability package and down in module configuration. And from here you can find something called batch configuration. And the batch configuration is a way of telling the system how should I get the primary keys that I need to work with. So when you use the doc key ampersand keyword, it's replaced by the primary key of the object, and in here you actually tell the system how to automatically get the primary key of the object. So the first thing you do is you select what UFI configuration do you want to run. So I have chosen my UFI here. And then you write a SQL where the first column in the SQL is the primary key of the object that you want to work on. So here I have written a SQL called that selects out the doc entry, and the document should be open and it shouldn't be exported already. If I try to run this, I can do that using the batch runner here. I can select it and then I can run it. It will just show me a preview of all the doc entries. So for each of the doc entries here, when I press OK, it will go through this UFI configuration here, send in the doc entry as the doc key, so that I can export each of the configurations for each of the results over here in the preview. So if I press OK to this, it will run and it will open right now all the documents that it creates. So as you can see, I get exported all the invoices as XML documents. And my folder here will get filled up with all the XML files that I exported. And I will just get a results window saying that it exported all of them. Now, a requirement from the customer was that a document should only be able to be exported once. So if I run it again now, it will actually just tell me you can export everything again. But if I go in here under UFI configuration, and then I can use the mark as handled SQL to actually tell the system that I want to update a UDF when I have done the export. So I just want to update this UDF here I created, set it to Y for each of the doc entries. Let me just disable this one here. But if I run it again now, and I say export it, it will just create all the files again. So it will just overwrite the existing ones. It has now been exported. But if I try to run it again, I don't have anything as they are now marked as handled. The way I filter them out is that in the batch configuration window here, I actually include that the UF should contain an N, but right now all my doc entries or documents will have an Y in this field here instead. Now I'm actually ready to schedule this. So if I go in to Universal Function Schedules here, let me just close some of these screens here. I'm actually ready to set up a schedule that should run the batch configuration automatically. So, and I need to select the batch configuration here, define some emails, and then I can set it up that it should just run every 5 minutes and it should just export all the new documents every 5 minutes, like this. Before the scheduler will actually run, you need to have the B1UP server component installed. So I have just opened the configuration window for it here. And the B1UP server component is part of the B1UP download, and we have some e-learning videos onto how to actually set it up. But when you have it set up, you can actually go in and you can try the one called Schedule Tester here, where the new schedule that we created will be shown. So it will run every 5 minutes, but you can also go in and just start it from here if you want to actually test it. Right now I don't have any new data, so it won't do anything, but I could go in here and start the schedule and it would export invoices that are new. The last of my customer's requirement was that it should be uploaded to an FTP after generation. To do this, we have a small tool that is included with the B1UP download. So this here is my current B1UP version. And from here I have the server component installation here. But I also have a folder here called Tools, where we have a small program called AutoFTP. So this here I have unzipped to my disk, and basically it's just a small program that allows you to automatically upload or download files from an FTP. It's free to use and it's just included with the download, but it allows you to automatically download or upload files from an FTP. So I create a new configuration. Then I define the FTP details. I select what folder should it take the files from, and it should be from the folder that was called Open Invoices, where UFA exports into. Should just upload to the root directory on the FTP, and then it should upload and archive the files. So if something goes wrong, they should be put into error, and if everything goes okay, they should be put into archive. I can then test the connection. I have a firewall that's blocking it, so let me just try again. Test connection. Connection okay. And then I can just tell it, okay, try to run the configuration. Continue. And then it will actually start uploading all my invoices to the FTP server. So it's running right now. Now I also had the requirement that this should be automated. And the way you can automate the AutoFTP is by using a task, a Windows task. Let me just see if I can find it. So you're going to use a Windows task scheduler to actually run this AutoFTP here. So you just go in to the task scheduler and say, I would like to create a new task. Then you define a trigger. So I'm going to do it every 5 minutes. Like this. And the action should be that it should run AutoFTP. And then I need to supply, it's done. Then I need to supply an argument here. And the argument I need to supply is the ID of my current configuration. So by supplying 1 as the argument here, I actually tell AutoFTP that it should run this configuration here. So you can have multiple configurations and you can have multiple Windows tasks, but you need to define in the argument what configuration ID it should actually run. But if I write one here, then it will run my upload invoices every 5 minutes. So now I actually have a full setup where I have the format requirements here. So I can export open invoices per customer, I can export the customer data, I can export the invoice lines, I have my XML format, and it's now automated with both writing it to a disk automatically and uploading it to an FTP automatically within 5 minutes of it having been exported. Of course, sometimes the requirements from a customer changes, or the ones that are receiving the file needs to have it in a different way. So I had a change in requirements that now says that all customers and documents should be in one file instead of multiple files. It should include some header data about the sender company, and it should include the sum of all the invoices in the file in the end of the file. To handle this, we need to use something in the UFE configuration called a batch, because we now need to have all the files or all the results into one file instead of multiple files. To handle this, again, I have created a function button to actually run it off in the beginning. And you can see that the window now looks slightly different, and this is due to having selected batch here in the export type instead of single. The way the batch works is it gives you the option to have a header and a footer that will only be printed out once. So the header and the footer will only be printed into the file once, while the body will be printed as many times as there are results in the batch configuration. So if you have the batch configuration here, and this one is the one connected to the UFE, then here you can see it selects card code from the business partner table. So if I try to run it using the batch runner here, it will show me a preview of the customer that is going to export for. But this is connected to UFE in the way that for each of the customers here, it will run the body, but it will only run the header and the footer once. So the header and the footer will be printed once, while the body will be printed as many times as there are results here. This actually allows me to create a single file where I have a header and a footer, but I have the body repeated many times. So this allows me to fulfill the customer's requirements that it should all be put into one file. The actual configuration of it is that I have my header where I need to include some data about my company. So I have a header SQL source here where I just select out my company name. And then in the body, I again have a body SQL source, card code and card name, where my doc key is my card code. And I also have the line sources, where I go in and I just select out all document lines for this business partner, and I include a few things about them, like this here. And I write it into my body using this for each loop here. So as you can see, it's not that much XML or code I have in here, but again, I write out each of the lines using the for each loop. Then at the end, I write out the open doc total for the sum of all the lines that I have exported using a SQL that just sums the doc total from all the invoices, and it just makes sure that this is actually one of the documents that I have exported by using this where condition here. So if I press the button here, it will just write it out for this specific customer as the doc key. When you use it on a function button, it will give you the primary key of what you're standing on right now. So it will only write it out for this specific customer here. But as you can see, I got all the lines in here, and I got an open total in the bottom, and I got some header information up here. If I try to run it using the batch configuration instead, using the batch runner, I will get one file, but now the file will actually have multiple customers in here with all the lines in them, like this. I could again set this up to run on a schedule, and I could then have the auto FTP program actually uploaded to the FTP. Some tips and tricks on working with UFA is that you should always try to understand the format and what the customer actually needs before starting to implement it. Every customer is different, so even though a format might look the same, they are probably going to be using some different fields, or they want to have some different data going into basically the same fields. So my suggestion would be to never implement the full specification if you can do it with like 50%, because chances are that it's a general format where the customer only needs to use like 10 or 15 fields, and if you do the entire thing, then you might end up using time on actually creating fields in a format that are never going to be used. So understanding the format and understanding what the customer actually needs is key to implementing UFA correctly. I always start out by implementing it on a function button like you saw here, so that I can test it and play around with it really easy from a function button, and then afterwards I go in and create the batch configuration and the schedule and everything. I would also suggest to keep an export of the UFA plus the documentation, so that you can reuse it at other customers that might need the same. An example of a real-life implementation of UFA is that we have created a standard format called Invoice in Finland. It's a format that they use. It consists of around 200 lines of XML, and after understanding the format, it took 5 hours for a consultant to actually implement the entire thing, set it up to run automatically, and include the FTP program. So after understanding the format, it's really easy to actually create the UFA configuration, include all the data, and then you can have a fully working system in a matter of hours or days, where if you wanted to actually code this, it would take multiple days to do, as you would need to create the add-on, create the server component, create the auto FTP program, and so on. So with UFA, you're really able to export files quickly and get up and running at the customer. This actually concludes this feature focus session. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. And the next feature focus session will be on the 17th of November, where Rasmus is going to be showing you advanced view and print delivery actions. Thank you very much for attending.